Nice to have you in India, Mr. Gates. Thank you for speaking to Times Now, and thank you for speaking to me. You've been here for a few days now, and you've probably got a sense of the apprehension that some harbor about the India growth story. The numbers aren't looking so bright. But Bill Gates is quite bullish on India. Why?
Well, India has immense potential. You've got 1.3 billion people. You have so many people looking at new technology. You know, the firms here are very world class. Some of the tough issues about improving education and health are real priorities. There's a lot of innovations that should help those be delivered in a better way. Our foundation's been in India for almost 20 years now. We've had some partnerships. There's been a lot of progress. Things like childhood death have come down quite dramatically, vaccine coverage. I was just up in Bihar seeing the chief minister there, who we've worked with for over a decade now, and you know, the progress has been fantastic.
So you're seeing visible progress on the ground.
That's right. I mean, I'm not an expert on the near-term economy so much, but I do know that this interstate competition where, you know, one state gets their vaccine rates up to be pretty high, adopts the new vaccines, you know, the other states want. And so the digital tools let us measure a lot better. And some of that brings us bad news. You know, some of the malnutrition numbers in India are not what they should be. And that it's very important to fix that, because that blocks your human capital. If you're malnourished, your brain, your body, for yourself, it's a tragedy. For the country, it's a tragedy. So as we've measured these things better, a few of them really point out where investments are needed. But overall, the trend in health is quite good. And that's the area our foundation has gotten involved and had great partnerships throughout the government.
The Prime Minister has set about turning India into a $5 trillion economy by 2024. That means almost doubling where we are at right now in the size of an economy. Now, there's some very strong global headwinds. Do you think we can do it?
You know, I'm not an economist. Certainly, if you take China during its periods of highest growth, it sustained greater than 10% growth. Now, when it did that, you know, nobody thought it was possible to do. And what it took in terms of deregulation, investing in nourishment, it was pretty miraculous how the labor laws, the land laws, the deregulation that led to that performance. Clearly, India is going to grow. So whether you reach that number in 2024, you will reach that number. I mean, this is 20% of humanity is here. You've got a lot of good leaders. You've got some things where the West did things a way that you can learn from. You have some things that are unique to India, like the India Stack, which is digitally enabling health and education. So yes, I'm bullish, but not the one to predict the next year's ups or downs.
Let's talk a little bit about the kind of work that you get into here. Now, development cannot just be about numbers. We know that. It's all about sustainability, inclusiveness, equity. Can growth be both fast and equitable, in your opinion? Do you think it's possible at all?
Well, that's up to government. If you have a progressive taxation system, then even if there's, you know, some companies are doing really well, those resources go to the government, and then you can have more women's groups, self-help groups like Javika that have done super well for a lot of things. You can buy more vaccines. You can hire more doctors and healthcare workers. And so yes, there is a virtuous cycle that as countries grow their economy, they collect more in taxes. They have to do that the right way. They are able to run health and education systems that take their human capital, which is the most important thing they have, and develops that. And so India's on that path of development. You know, there's a lot of countries behind India, a lot of countries ahead of India, but it'll forge its own path. It's the world's biggest democracy with all sorts of challenges and opportunities.
You talked about a progressive tax system. Now, India's just cut corporate tax, and we made this almost equal to the most progressive economies on the planet. Many also say that we should be cutting income tax. There's always that debate in a democracy between corporate tax, the rich guys, you're giving them a bit of an incentive. Why don't you give us an incentive? Where do you stand on this debate on taxes? I've heard some of your views on it. I'm just curious.
Well, over time, India will have to collect more in taxes. And in some cases, that'll mean higher tax rates. Again, that's another thing. I'm not an expert on the Indian tax system, but India does not spend enough on health today. A lot of the health expenses, over 60%, are out-of-pocket expenses. And just to do the primary health care at the kind of quality that you'd really like to have, that spending is going to have to go up. And so economists can decide, how much you can do that through deficit spending, or at some point, your exchange rate, that really creates a problem. So whether or not, as you go through cycles, how you moderate the taxes to minimize down cycles, I think in every country, the rich, I know in the United States, the rich are going to pay more in taxes to provide the equity, the healthcare benefits, the retirement benefits, the high quality education that people expect. The government needs a lot of resources, and so the taxation generally goes up, even tax collection, slightly faster than GDP, and so that the government can improve all of those infrastructural investments.
Well, the one thing we've started doing, to our credit, some would say, is to better target welfare schemes to people, and we've been doing this through the unique identity card, Aadhaar, which has become a vehicle really for expanding the reach of welfare schemes, as you know. But there's also concern as we get more digitized, so to speak. There are concerns about data colonization, data theft, leading to invasion of privacy. Do you think this is a conflict that's going to play out, resolve itself in a positive way, or are we just going to get shackled by court cases and all sorts of lurid documentaries that tell you that this is going to be a problem as we go forward?
Well, Aadhaar is a huge asset for India. It was designed very well. The fact that you can make digital payments so easily, you can open a bank account. India is a leader in that. Our foundation, worked with the Reserve Bank, Nandan Nilekani and a group of people that he pulled together did a great job. The Supreme Court case on privacy, got people debating about that. And in the end, some new capabilities were added, but the design, the consent architecture actually held up very well. And there are huge benefits to being able to get digital government money to the beneficiary instead of having it go to the big man in the village. So the inefficiency and the corruption that you have when you can't use a digital scheme like that, and you can't tell, is this a ghost worker, a duplicate thing, it really undermines the credibility of government. And I've seen a lot of countries where government's not spending the money well, and so the taxpayers just don't want to pay taxes at all. And so you can have a state that gets into a very low equilibrium, that the education and the health are very poor, but the cynicism of, hey, what corrupt person will this go to, holds back changing that. In the case of India, the savings by these direct transfers has been high. These digital systems will help you as you implement health insurance, as you try to get the education levels to be even better, and you let kids find the right online materials. So digital work, yes, you can make mistakes, but in the case of the consent and privacy around Aadhaar, India should be proud of that.
You've got Nandan Nilekani to work with you, partner you, the words that you've used. How's that going? And I believe that you're using this architecture to reach out to other parts of the world too. How's that going?
That's at a fairly early stage, but the potential is quite phenomenal. In many African countries, only about 40% of the people have access to bank accounts, and the fees are very high, and you have to travel to the bank, and it's just not set up to deal with small transactions. When people are sending money back to their country, they can pay fees that are over 10%. In India today, if you look at the fee structure of the various digital schemes, it's very, very low, in some cases even completely free. That's amazing. In the US, when we use credit cards, we're paying 2 or 3%. The money just disappears every time you do a transaction. So yes, whether it's for finance or education or health, a lot of the digital pioneering being done in India, our foundation, by partnering with Nandan and the iSpirit group, we're going to make sure other countries have those same opportunities.
A lot of work is being done in trying to get cheaper medicines to the people who need them. Now that requires a lot of R&D. You've been partnering some of India's companies doing that. Many people also say that from the first world, that look, there are patent issues, there are rights issues, there are chemical compositions that need to be sort of, restricted to those countries where some of them have been invented. Where do you come in on this? Because as the world becomes more global, you're going to have these conflicts. Do you think big business, big pharma, is a little too protective about the benefits of modern medicine?
Well, big pharma is why millions of kids aren't dying. Big pharma is why we will eventually find a cure to Alzheimer's. The progress in cancer is quite phenomenal. So, the kind of invention that's coming out of that really is the reason why medical costs won't, completely choke all these economies. How the tiered pricing should work, what should the US price be? What should the Europe price be? What should China, India, Africa, if you take that sort of ladder of GDP, clearly the price is going to be the highest in the richest country. And for Africa, for very poor countries, you shouldn't be making any return at all. It should just be the cost of production. And so for every company, how do you do that tiering is tricky. Even India, should there be a public sector price versus a private sector price? Does that ever work? But it's important that we applaud the idea that this R&D is going to get done. Here in India, you have people like Biocon and Serum, who sometimes do completely novel research or sometimes take things as they come off patent and make them available at very low cost to the world. Serum vaccines are phenomenal. They're a partner of ours, but what they've done to do great high quality vaccines at an affordable price really has saved millions of lives.
India has put in place a Jan Dhan Yojana. I'm not sure if you know what that is. That's really a sort of pension scheme for the masses, especially the poorest of the poor, for financial inclusion and a form of universal health care through the Ayushman Bharat scheme. But a welfare model, Mr. Gates, many people say is expensive. You've just talked about how much resource the government would need, perhaps through taxation, to fund all these schemes. Many people says that, it bloats the fiscal deficit. It entrenches big government. Do you believe these are concerns that we must disregard? Or are they real concerns which could send economies into tailspins?
Well, there's no doubt that the government can't get safety net spending too far ahead of its tax collection, or you'll end up with some fiscal crisis.
Yeah.
And over time, you'd like your safety net to be as strong as it is in rich countries. But if you immediately tried to say, okay, everybody gets free hospital treatment, you would overwhelm the system's capacity, and the government wouldn't be able to afford that. So it's a great political discussion of what should you do with the safety net and what do you do with that tax collection. I'm enough of a liberal to say I think you should raise tax collection maybe a bit faster and therefore be able to afford the safety net, particularly in health and education. Those to me are the two magic things. The government will see what the current insurance scheme is going to end up costing, and then they'll have to decide, do they make it less generous or do they raise taxes in order to match that? I think it's great that they're going down that path. Over time, you want to get so that healthcare is basically a right, even though that's not affordable right now.
So you see a big role for government, especially in a country like India?
Well, in healthcare, yes, I see a role for the government to make sure that most healthcare is available to everyone. It doesn't mean, though, that the employees who deliver that healthcare have to be government employees. If you look at the rich countries, some like the UK do have the health service literally be part of the government. Most of the rich countries have not done it that way. Most use private entities to actually do the work, and the government is a regulator and a payer, and it's able to make sure it's getting the best price and high quality. Some of the digital infrastructure we talked about that is being worked on will allow that plumbing to work efficiently, not having the kind of paperwork overhead that the US has gotten into, because we didn't start out with a clear standard of those digital records. So the education, the government's got to be involved. Health, they've got to be involved. But for India, I think a lot of the execution, most of the growth and capacity will be over on that private sector side.
Look, in India, the Prime Minister has invested very heavily in the Swachh Bharat mission. And the Swachh Bharat mission has taken off here, courtesy the focus he's brought to some of these programs. You yourself have given him an award for that. There was a bit of criticism over that. What do you make of it?
Well, I think it's very brave of the Prime Minister to talk about the sanitation problems and set ambitious goals for improving those. And we thought that was praiseworthy because we're very involved in sanitation. We've seen it become a priority here. We've seen that there is progress. Living where there's human waste around, most of us don't remember that. It's a terrible thing, not just for the living conditions, but also for the diseases that are spread around. And there's a lot more to be done, but India was a laggard on some of these issues, and now it's getting to be pioneering a number of things that other countries definitely should look at. So if you think about sanitation, you want political leadership in that area.
So for you, it was never a question of bowing to the pressure at any point when people wrote to you to say, okay, look, we don't want to give this award, please don't give this award to the Prime Minister. It was never really a factor for you, because for you the message was more important.
Well, we know sanitation, right. And we know that there's been progress, and a good example was set. We're not able, we don't look at everything that goes on. Right. That's not our expertise. The Prime Minister came, he graciously received the award on behalf of India, and there's a lot more to be done, and we'll try and help with that.
As a champion of fighting climate change, do you have empathy with those emerging economies such as ours, who feel that far too much is being demanded of them by the developed world that has perhaps already exhausted its right to pollute?
Yes. The cost of going green is very high today. Making steel without emissions, making cement, even a reliable power system where you just have intermittent power and you don't use coal, it's very expensive to build that. And so for the rich world to turn to middle income countries like India and say, hey, you have to go clean, we better do a lot of innovation to make those premium costs, what I call the green premium, we better bring those down pretty dramatically, because otherwise it's like you say, they can say, hey, per person, we haven't emitted as much as you did, and so we're going to go and match what you emitted. Now the problem is, if that's done, then you're talking about warming not 2 degrees centigrade, but over 4 degrees centigrade. And so India is a country that's near the equator, doesn't want to have to slow down its development because of high green premiums, but it doesn't want the world to have high levels of emission. And so, India and the Prime Minister came to the Paris climate talks, and he and I and President Obama and other leaders announced this mission innovation, that there should be more research that goes on for cheap energy solutions. So, we all better hope for the world, and including India, that we can bring those premiums, the cost of being green, down so dramatically that the cars and buses and power plants that are green aren't so much more expensive, that we need to get into this argument about, hey, per person, the US has done more emissions than, if we project that out, than we could possibly afford to have the entire world engage in.
Well, Bill Gates, let me ask you this, because I think we're running out of time. Where can someone like you, who's been an innovator, come in to save this planet? We're now scratching at an existential crisis.
Well, I think we need all of society to get involved, because the government is so key in funding the research and planning the electricity network and policies that will encourage people to move towards these things. I'm trying to do my part. I'm very lucky that I have lots of resources. I get to look ahead, meet with scientists who understand these problems. That's why I've written a book about climate change. A lot of the work of the foundation is exactly what you would do if you care about climate change. Make sure that you have better seeds for these poor farmers who are going to suffer the most. Make sure that the health services are helping. So even if you have storms and slightly increased disease, that's not resulting in an increase in childhood death. And so I'm very big on innovation. My whole career, first in software, now in health, has been about innovation. And so I'm trying to contribute in that area, which I know best, of how do we accelerate innovation so that the price is such that by 2050, which is not that long from now, we can get everybody either to zero or very, very close to it.
Okay, my last question. Tell us what you like about this country. You keep coming back to it.
Well, India's amazing. I mean, it definitely is a cup 2/3 full. There's brilliant people here that I've gotten to partner with and work with. Even at Microsoft, we've got people like Satya who are just phenomenal in what they do. And so the potential here is exciting. And there's always a lot of progress being made, even though there's a few setbacks from time to time. And India's really the crucible. A lot of our new ideas, like giving health workers a cell phone, they're going to get proved out here. We'll learn a lot together in partnership, and then we'll take those ideas to Africa and other poor countries. And so, just the dynamics of what the startups are doing here, or how the India stack's going, gets me thinking so hard about, okay, how do we take this global? So it's an amazing country.
Pleasure speaking to you. Thank you for taking the time out. Thank you so much.